This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Atelia with tonight's top stories from East Asia. A Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi heads to Washington tomorrow, bracing for what she says will be tough talks with President Donald Trump over Iran. And that's after the U.S. shifted its tone. Mr. Trump saying he doesn't need any help securing the Strait of Hormuz oil and goods passage, taking aim at Tokyo and Seoul for sitting it out. And relief for South Korea, securing 24 million barrels of oil after the UAE stepped in, pledging priority crude supply. Seoul says it has dodged the worst-case scenario. And petrol prices in Japan hit record highs as the Iran war weighs heavily, forcing Asian economies into a scramble for alternative sources of energy. And China makes a new pitch to Taiwan, offering energy stability if Taipei accepts Beijing's rule, part of a wider push for reunification, an idea the self-governed island has long rejected. Also tonight, Japan sets a new record for inbound tourists in the month of February, despite a plunge in Chinese visitors amid diplomatic tensions. A Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi walking a diplomatic tightrope as she heads to Washington for a summit with President Donald Trump. She's warning of tough talks and, according to Bloomberg, a meeting that could potentially be, quote, extremely difficult. The U.S. leader has criticized Tokyo for rejecting his demand to send warships to unblock oil flow in the Strait of Hormuz. Well, Iran has attacked several ships in the waterway since the war began, effectively closing off the strait. Well, Mr. Trump argues countries that rely on oil flows through the strait have a responsibility to protect it. And he singled out Japan and South Korea and also lashed out at NATO allies for refusing his request. Mr. Trump now says he no longer needs nor desires the help of others, claiming the U.S. has decimated Iran's military.
I've long said that, I wonder whether or not NATO would ever be there for us. So this was a great test, because we don't need them, but they should have been there.
CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida joins us live now from Tokyo. So, Michio, has Ms. Takaichi given any indication how she'll be handling this difficult meeting with Mr. Trump?
Well, in Parliament, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has been questioned frequently about her meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. The latest is this. She said she was aware his comments change daily, and she intends to go to the United States with that in mind and what's best for Japan. Well, one of the most important agenda is to bring stability in the Middle East. Over 90% of Japan's crude oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But 40 Japanese vessels are stuck in the Persian Gulf. And authorities are saying that in 2 more days, the arrival of fuel will slow down due to the stalemate. And although Japan has over 250 days worth of reserved oil, it could run out if the war continues for months. And Ms. Takaichi said she will convey to Mr. Trump the war is hurting both economies and the economic security in Asia, and that the situation in the Middle East must be stabilized. Now, her objective is to achieve peace and stability in the Middle East. Now, a few days ago, Mr. Trump called for some countries to send their warships to the Strait of Hormuz, and Japan was among them. Ms. Takaichi says she will tell him what Japan can and cannot do. The Self-Defense Force, for instance, is governed by a strict law. It cannot go to areas where combat is taking place. Japan is under a pacifist constitution. And Ms. Takaichi told Parliament the U.S. should be aware of Japanese law. But some political watchers here are skeptical whether the Trump administration is aware of Japanese law. Now, other key issues on the agenda for Ms. Takaichi as she heads for the United States discuss the second stage of the $550 billion investment Japan has pledged to the United States last year in exchange for lowering of reciprocal tariffs to 15%. And the first batch of projects were agreed this February. They're developing a natural gas power plant in Ohio, oil export terminal in Texas, industrial diamond facility in Georgia. And next is expected to be on nuclear power projects. Ms. Takaichi is also expected to talk about her strained ties with China, as Mr. Trump is expected to head to China, although he's postponed this trip sometime in the near future. And the Japanese Foreign Ministry stressed Japan wants to reaffirm U.S. commitment for a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is a pillar of Japan's diplomacy.
And we'll certainly be looking out for that high-stakes meeting tomorrow. Thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Micho Ishida reporting live from Tokyo. South Korea, in the meantime, says that it is still considering Mr. Trump's call for naval escort in the Strait of Hormuz, noting that any deployment to the strait would require parliamentary approval. In the meantime, it has secured a major oil lifeline with a pledge from the United Arab Emirates to supply 24 million barrels of crude.
전 세계적인 원유 수급 비상 상황 속에서 UAE는 한국에 최우선적으로 원유를 공급할 것임을 약속했습니다. 한국보다 먼저 원유를 공급받는 나라는 없을 것이다. 한국은 원유 공급에서 최우선이다. 직접적인 표현으로는 넘버원 프라이어리티라고 분명하게 약속해 주었습니다.
Authorities say 18 million barrels will be rushed under emergency plans on top of an earlier 6 million already secured. But details are unclear, just that shipments will come through diversified supply channels. South Korea imports almost all of its energy, with roughly 70% of its crude oil and a fifth of its LNG coming from the Middle East. Seoul also moved its crude oil supply warning to level 2. Well, that's the second lowest in a 4-tier crisis warning system. This means authorities can tap shared international reserves, prioritize oil purchases, and secure alternative supplies that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. China seizing on the energy crisis to advance its goal of reunification with Taiwan. It's offering energy stability to the democratic island if Taipei agrees to Beijing's rule. China's Taiwan Affairs Office says a peaceful reunification would better protect Taiwan's energy and resource security, with a strong motherland as its backing. There is no immediate response from Taiwan, which has long denied China's claim over the island. Now, Taiwan receives a third of its LNG from Qatar and has said it secured other supplies for the months ahead, including from the U.S. It does not source energy from China. Beijing, the world's top oil importer, has reportedly banned fuel exports until at least the end of March to prevent domestic shortages. While Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz to most vessels, reports say it has allowed oil shipments to China to proceed. Now, Iranian forces have launched a fresh wave of missile strikes on Israel, vowing, quote, decisive retaliation for the killing of top security chief Ali Larijani. Tehran also confirmed the killing of Gholam Reza Soleimani. He's a commander of the Basij militia, known for its role in suppressing protests. Explosions were reported near Tel Aviv, where at least 2 people were killed after missiles struck a residential area. Iran targeted the city with missiles carrying cluster warheads designed to break apart into multiple smaller explosives mid-air, making them difficult to intercept. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says the global repercussions of the war have only just begun and will affect all countries. Gulf states say they have intercepted Iranian drones and missiles targeting locations including U.S. bases, while explosions were reported in Dubai. Fiona Nicole-Me is covering the story for CNA, and she joins us live from Dubai. So, Fiona, we are seeing reports of several Iranian strikes and interceptions across the Gulf region. What is the latest on that front?
Yeah, you're joining me here. Quiet at the moment, I will say. However, we, are seeing multiple strikes across the Gulf nation throughout the past 12 hours. A tense night across the Gulf, as I say. Several countries reported missile and drone attacks. Here in the United Arab Emirates, residents in Dubai received 3 alerts from the Ministry of Interior overnight. 2 more this morning, warning to take shelter amid the missile and drone attacks. Residents in Abu Dhabi also reporting the same, and officials say the incoming threats were intercepted and there were no injuries. We have, however, heard from the Australian officials who have said that one Iranian projectile hit near Al Minhad airbase, just outside where I join you from now in Dubai. It hosts Australian military personnel and has sparked a small fire at accommodation block there. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, says no Australian personnel were hurt in the incident and stressed Australia is not at war. But we have obviously seen in the last week Canberra sending air-to-air missiles deployed to the UAE to assist. We also heard from His Highness Sheikh Al Nahyan today, the UAE Deputy Prime Minister. He expressed his sincere condolences and deep sympathies to the families of the victims here in the UAE for what he called Iran's unprovoked terrorist attacks targeting the country. In Saudi, we saw the Defense Ministry say a drone was shot down near the embassy's district, a crucial target for Iranians, and another missile landed close to the Prince Sultan airbase. Qatar confirming the country intercepted a missile over Doha, and Kuwait and Bahrain also reporting overnight interception. Wider region, US Embassy in Baghdad also coming under attack today, second day in a row. And we've also had reports of strikes near Baghdad airport that were thankfully intercepted.
Now, as all of these strikes are going on, Fiona, Saudi Arabia, I believe, they're hosting Arab and Islamic foreign ministers in Riyadh today to discuss the regional security. Do we know what's the objective of this meeting?
Yeah, the Saudi Foreign Ministry saying the goal of these talks is to deepen the consultation and coordination on how best to support peace and stability across the region. Obviously, a steady build-up of diplomacy across the Gulf and Arab nations, positioning themselves, as some of the voices consistently calling for an end to this war. We're expecting today, renewed condemnation in those talks, and again, broader warning that this war is inherently expansive and risks drawing more of the region into the conflict. They've categorically been quite condemnationary of the Iranian attacks, but we will obviously continue to see pressure being applied to all sides in this conflict to return to the negotiating table, which we saw officials attend on February 27th.
Well, meantime, Tehran has announced that there are going to be funerals for slain senior figures Larijani and Soleimani. That's apparently going to take place today. What else do we know about this?
Yeah, of course, those confirmations coming that those funerals will take place at some point today. Official timing not confirmed. I will say, however, we did see that confirmation from Tehran last night and into this morning that indeed those both chiefs were killed in Israeli strikes on Tehran. We've seen this comments from Iran's foreign minister as well in the past 12 hours or so, speaking to Al Jazeera, saying that this loss is not going to prevent them defending their territory. We saw with the death of Ali, the Ayatollah, there on the first day of conflict on February 28th, and renewed calls, renewed stance from Tehran that would not affect their position, and it's worth noting that, the most recent fatalities here, they are the most senior figures in Tehran's leadership, and what's becoming quite apparent since this war 19 days ago, we have seen that, these attacks on what would be considered friendly nations such as Oman have filtered down through the military organization. And that's what's leading to the conflict here.
Well, many thanks for that update, Fiona Nicole Mee, covering this story for CNA from Dubai. Our time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Asian economies scrambling to secure alternative supply sources as attacks on UAE energy infrastructure intensify. Plus, Japan exports rose at a slower clip in February as car shipments to the US fell and as demand in China took a beating. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and you are just in time for a business update with Olivia Marzuki. So, Olivia, we want to talk about the oil price surge. Apparently, that is felt at the pump now, and it's, touching record highs in Japan?
That's right. So, petrol prices in Japan, Oteli, are surging to all-time highs as Iran war continues to trigger supply shock. So, pump prices rising for a fifth straight week to $1.20 per liter, surpassing last year's peak of $1.17 per liter. Rising crude costs and import-dependent Japan are driving that surge. Prices spiked ahead of state subsidies aimed at capping levels near $1.07 per liter. Although PM Sanae Takaichi actually warned they could exceed $1.26. The government will roll out 19 cents per liter in subsidies to suppliers this week. It has asked refiners to use the released crude in order to secure domestic supplies. That will reduce Japan's national reserves by 17%. And the government is also considering procuring crude oil from Alaska. Renewed Iranian attacks on the UAE have once again stoked worries over global energy supply. Operations remain suspended at one of the largest natural gas fields in the world after a drone strike on Monday. Reports say a key port in Fujairah has halted oil holdings and loadings after a third attack in 4 days. Fujairah serves as a key shipping hub for the wider region, and it sits outside of the Strait of Hormuz. So analysts are concerned if Iran widens its attacks.
The fear is that some of the red lines that are still in place can be crossed in the near future. And I'm thinking of large-scale attacks against energy infrastructure in different countries in the Gulf region, not only in Iran, but maybe with Iran also attacking neighboring countries' energy installations.
Oil prices dipping in Asian trade today after Iraq said it had resumed exports through Turkey, and as rising U.S. crude inventories outweigh escalating attacks on UAE energy infrastructure. But analysts warn that the positive mood could fade if the crisis drags on. Brent crude has risen nearly 40% since the onset of the conflict, and traders have been pricing in long-term effects to supply that could keep prices elevated despite the release of strategic oil reserves. Iran's powerful parliament speaker has warned maritime traffic through the key waterway won't return to pre-war status. Roughly a fifth of global oil and LNG supplies normally pass through the Strait of Hormuz each day. Asia is most affected as many countries rely heavily on imported fossil fuels. Sri Lanka has declared Wednesdays a public holiday to conserve fuel. Bangladesh has brought forward Ramadan holidays in universities and introduced planned blackouts. Thailand is encouraging work from home, asking civil servants to suspend overseas trips, skip suits in meetings, reduce reliance on air conditioning, and to take the stairs instead of lifts. Southeast Asia's largest economy and most populous nation, Indonesia, is the biggest importer of oil products in the region. Analysts have warned of energy risks as millions prepare for Mudik, the traditional homecoming pilgrimage ahead of the Eid festival. And the Indonesian government has promised to keep fuel prices steady. Now, those surging oil prices also leading some Asian economies to scramble to secure Russian oil after the U.S. announced it was temporarily waiving sanctions on shipments already at sea. Now, before the war on Iran began, Russia's Urals blend traded at a discount compared to Brent and WTI, as only a handful of nations were openly buying Russian crude, and that includes China, India, and Turkey. The war sent prices of Urals surging, briefly passing the $100 mark, but it's still up more than 55% from the eve of the war. Analysts estimate that there are around 130 million barrels worth of Russian crude oil out at sea last week, with around half of that between the Suez Canal and Singapore. Since the U.S. waiving of sanctions, India has reportedly doubled its purchases of Russian crude, while China and Turkey also snapping up barrels. Some Southeast Asian countries have also expressed interests. The Philippines and Thailand say they have contacted Russian suppliers, while Indonesia says it is open to buying crude from any country. Japan exports grew at a slower pace in February as car shipments to the U.S. fell and as demand in China slumped due to the Lunar New Year holidays. Outbound shipments rose 4.2% on year after a big jump in the previous month, but it is well above market estimates. Exports to the U.S. and China fell, but stronger demand across Asia and the rest of Asia helped make up for it. Imports that climbed 10.2%. Coming in slightly below expectations, and that left Japan with a surprise trade surplus of around $360 million. Still, analysts warn that rising oil costs are fueling stagflation risks, posing a threat to Japan's energy-dependent economy. The Bank of Japan is expected to keep interest rates intact while signaling its tightening stance as a weak yen and higher oil prices add to inflationary pressures. Staying in Japan, the auto industry there also taking a hit from the holdup at Hormuz, with some car makers saying that they will have to cut production due to the supply crunch of raw materials. Toyota is expected to cut production by around 40,000 vehicles through to the end of April, while Nissan says it is cutting back output by 1,200 vehicles this month. The move by Nissan comes amid a shortage and a storage crunch, as shipments bound for the Middle East have halted. The Middle East is indeed an important market for Japanese automakers. Last year, Toyota sold more than 500,000 vehicles to the 10 countries in the region, including Iran, while Nissan sold 130,000. Usually up to 15 cars in car carriers leave Japan bound for the Middle East every month. Each carrier carry up to 5,000 vehicles. Analysts say that there are currently around 15 of these carriers waiting outside the Strait of Hormuz. While they can be rerouted to Jeddah along the Red Sea, Japanese shipping companies have stopped going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait due to past attacks on commercial vessels by the Houthis. Chinese EV battery makers forging ahead in the global market. Their combined market share exceeded 70% last year, up from under 50% in 2021, while net profit jumped 42% to a record $10.5 billion. China accounted for 60% of global vehicle battery installations in 2025, and CATL led the EV and hybrid battery market, followed by BYD, supplying a range of Chinese and European auto car makers, including Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz. China's battery sector is supported by government subsidies, driving EV adoption, alongside expansion, production in Europe and Southeast Asia. Some analysts expect growth to slow this year. South Korean EV battery makers are, however, losing ground, with market share slipping to 15.3% last year. Top producer LG Energy Solution reported lower net profit in 2025, while SK On and Samsung SDI posted net losses. These declines follow the rollback of EV-friendly policies under the Trump administration, prompting some firms to cut U.S. plant staffing. Japanese battery makers also held a small share, with Panasonic below 4%. And that's all I have for you, Ottilie. Back to you.
Thanks so very much, Olivia. On that note, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia Tonight, what China is saying about a possible postponement of the U.S. President's summit with President Xi. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi heads to Washington tomorrow, bracing for what she says will be tough talks with President Donald Trump over Iran. And that's after the U.S. shifted its tone. Mr. Trump saying he doesn't need any help securing the Strait of Hormuz oil and goods passage, taking aim at Tokyo and Seoul for sitting it out. And relief for South Korea, securing 24 million barrels of oil after the UAE stepped in, pledging priority crude supply. Seoul says it has dodged the worst-case scenario. China says that a meeting between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump has a unique and important role in managing the relationship between both countries. And that's after the U.S. leader sought to postpone the summit to deal with the war on Iran.
元首外交对中美关系发挥着不可替代的战略引领作用。中美双方将继续就特朗普总统访华事保持沟通。
The world's two largest economies are aiming to reset ties and extend a trade truce during Mr. Trump's visit, originally set for the 31st of March. Mr. Trump had earlier suggested that he might postpone the meeting if China did not help to unblock oil flow in the Strait of Hormuz. But the White House has since clarified that Mr. Trump needs to stay in Washington to coordinate the war effort. Mr. Trump's top official on counter-terrorism has resigned over the war on Iran, urging the president to reverse course. Now, in a letter posted to his X account, National Counter-Terrorism Center Director Joe Kent said that Tehran posed no imminent threat to the U.S. and claimed that the administration started the fighting due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Well, the White House has dismissed the letter, saying that there was compelling evidence Iran was going to attack the U.S. first. President Trump called Mr. Kent a nice guy, but said he was weak on security. He says that his resignation made him realize it was a good thing that he left and that he disagreed with his assessment of the Iran conflict. Mr. Kent, a longtime supporter of the president, has served as a director of the National Counter-Terrorism Center since July. The organization oversees U.S. government intelligence on terrorist threats and retains a database of all known and suspected terrorists. Well, neighboring countries are being pulled deeper into the war in the Middle East. Violence has escalated between U.S. forces and Iraqi groups aligned with Tehran, with capital Baghdad rocked by a series of explosions close to the U.S. embassy. Now, Iraqi security officials say at least 3 drones were headed for the city's heavily fortified green zone. 2 were intercepted, but a 3rd crashed inside the embassy compound. Another drone reportedly headed for the U.S. diplomatic and logistics center in the city's airport was also intercepted. Well, shortly after the attacks, a powerful Tehran-backed group, Kataib Hezbollah, demanded every foreign soldier leave the country. It blames malicious American presence behind the nation's instability. U.S. strikes have been targeting Iran-backed groups in Iraq, which in turn have been ramping up their attacks on U.S. diplomatic posts. The Washington Post reports that the U.S. State Department is ordering all its embassies and missions to review their security amid the raging war and its spillover effects. Lebanon also pulled into the conflict after Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel, igniting a new Israeli offensive against the group. Israeli Defense Forces continuing what it calls a limited and targeted operation as it expands its ground invasion. A Lebanese state media reports a new Israeli strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs, while several buildings were destroyed overnight. More than 900 people in Lebanon have been killed by Israeli attacks over the past 2 weeks, while almost a fifth of the nation's population have been driven from their homes. More than 1 million Lebanese are now registered as displaced, mounting fears of a wider humanitarian fallout, as that number is set to increase rapidly. Well, the UN, in the meantime, has condemned a Pakistani strike on Kabul, calling for an independent investigation into the attack that killed more than 400 people. Well, the strike marks a sharp escalation in fighting between the South Asian neighbors. China has been offering to mediate before Monday's attack, urging both sides to resolve differences through dialogue. The Afghan government says the strike hit a drug rehab center. Islamabad insists it was targeting military installations and infrastructure that support terrorist attacks on Pakistani soil. Islamabad says that it will continue military operations in Afghanistan, while Kabul vows to defend itself. South Korea will officially raise its terror alert level by a notch as K-pop group BTS hosts its comeback concert in Seoul this week. 260,000 fans from around the world are expected to attend the one-hour event on Saturday. And authorities say they cannot rule out the possibility of terror threats targeting large-scale events in light of the current global security situation. And as a precaution, the alert level has been raised to the second level on a 4-tier scale in some parts of Seoul. The move takes effect tonight and will remain in place through midnight Saturday. Security and patrols will be stepped up, with officials preparing a joint response to any emergency. President Lee Jae-myung has asked for the public's cooperation in ensuring safety at the concert. Saturday's concert will be the first time all 7 BTS members will be performing together in nearly 3.5 years after completing their mandatory military service. Well, the chart-topping group, with its global fan base, is widely seen as a cultural ambassador of the Hallyu, or Korean wave. The comeback show in Seoul's symbolic Gwangnam Square will be open for all. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Japan shrugs off a plunge in Chinese visitors, setting a new record for inbound tourists in the month of February. Singapore and Japan will be upgrading their ties to a strategic partnership as the two countries mark 60 years of diplomatic relations. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and his Japanese counterpart Sanae Takaichi announced this as they met for talks in Tokyo today. Mr. Wong is in Japan for his first official visit since taking office.
Today, our relationship has matured and we have become partners with similar strategic outlooks and complementary strengths. And our cooperation is multifaceted, substantial, and mutually beneficial. There is strategic imperative to deepen our cooperation further, especially as we face profound changes in the world today with more uncertainty, fragmentation, and disruption.
It gives me a great pleasure to celebrate with you the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. There will be a lot of exchanges and programs, and I hope this will be the year in which we see further deepening of our already strong ties through diverse exchanges and programs.
Well, Japan, meantime, is weighing a possible ban on children using social media, taking cues from Australia's strict new rules for those under 16. But experts warn that it's too soon to judge whether Canberra's approach works or if it can be applied in Japan. Well, in January, Japan's Children and Families Agency launched a panel to study how social media affects young users. The group is looking at issues like overuse, cyber addiction, and exposure to harmful content. It will also recommend whether age limits should be introduced. Current laws require filters and also urge platforms to keep minors away from harmful sites. But experts say that these safeguards are easy to bypass. Some local governments have issued guidelines, though they carry no penalties. And Australia, on the other hand, has taken a tougher stance. Its recent law bans under 16s from major platforms like Instagram, X, and YouTube. Companies face heavy fines if they fail to enforce the rules. Since December, about 4.7 million accounts have been removed. Other countries are watching closely. Britain plans to set a similar age limit at 16, while Germany and Spain are considering restrictions. Meanwhile, French lawmakers have approved a ban on social media for children under 15. The bill, backed by President Emmanuel Macron, now heads to the Senate and is expected to pass with broad cross-party support. Now, if it becomes law, France would be among the first in Europe to enforce such a restriction, following Australia's move to limit access for those under 16. Ross Cullen files this report for CNA from Paris.
The next academic year in France could bring some big changes for children, with the likely ban on accessing social media for under 15s. Pupils at one high school in Paris had mixed feelings about the proposed legislation.
Moi, je pense que c'est très bien, parce que je vois beaucoup sur les réseaux TikTok, Instagram, tout ça, des jeunes, surtout sur Snapchat aussi, j'ai dit, genre qui ont 13-12 ans et qui utilisent mal les réseaux sociaux, qui font direct, qui regardent du contenu, on va dire des contenus pas pour leur âge.
Avant 15 ans, c'est vrai que c'est trop tôt et ça conditionne, ça met des idées dans la tête des jeunes qui sont trop influençables et ils peuvent pas encore vraiment prendre des décisions eux-mêmes et être indépendants de ce qu'ils pensent. Et du coup, voir trop d'informations, trop de réseaux sociaux, je pense que c'est très mal. Surtout qu'il y a plein de gens mal intentionnés. Moi, je pense pas que ça soit une solution. Je pense que la vraie solution, c'est l'éducation par rapport aux enfants, de faire de la prévention. Mais on peut pas totalement interdire les réseaux sociaux parce qu'ils trouveront un moyen, dans tous les cas, de contourner ces restrictions.
The bill would also ban mobile phones in all schools. Some already oblige pupils to hand in phones at the start of every lesson. But one teenager who asked not to be filmed demonstrated a popular tactic. Take an old phone to hand in and hold on to your working device. And some people think children will just as easily be able to circumvent a social media ban, for example by using virtual private networks to log on. But France fiercely defends its freedoms, and some activists think the move would impact the right to freedom of expression. Alice Apostoli is the advocacy officer at the campaign group Feminists Against Cyberbullying.
It does restrain liberty of communication. It also erodes the minors under 15's rights to be in a public space, online space, and also a very important place of socialization for young people.
Around 200 million people in Europe use TikTok every month. The company has said its teen accounts already have more than 50 built-in safety features, like screen time limits, private settings and parental controls, as it pushes back against proposals to restrict usage.
France is not alone in pursuing this legislation. Portugal, Denmark and Greece are just some of the nations pushing for similar action across the European Union.
Spain's Prime Minister wants tech bosses to face criminal liability if they fail to remove illegal or hateful content from their platforms. And the human rights organisation, the Council of Europe, argues the responsibility for safety online must come from the platforms themselves, rather than governments banning children from scrolling through social media. But President Macron has called for an accelerated legislative process in France to put a ban in place by the start of the new school year in September. For CNA, I'm Ross Cullen in Paris.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang has laid out new plans for the future of the world's most valuable company at its annual GTC conference in Silicon Valley. Now, those include restarting the manufacturing of an AI chip for the Chinese market and continuing to develop the technology used in autonomous vehicles. Ara Spitzer is at the chip giant's flagship event in San Jose, California, and files this report for CNA.
NVIDIA's annual GTC event here in Silicon Valley has become one of the biggest tech events in the world, and that's because of just how integrated so many of the chip makers' products are into elements of the artificial intelligence ecosystem. At a special preview of some of its latest offerings, the California-based firm showed off how its products are used in everything from factory design to robotics to autonomous vehicles.
The challenges are really in the long tail, right? The edge cases, the events that are rare or difficult. And so what a reasoning model enables the policy to do is to think through, when I'm here at this new situation, how can I solve this problem?
Those tools are used in NVIDIA's long-running partnership with Mercedes, and at GTC, they announced further partnerships with automakers like BYD and Hyundai. Another NVIDIA engineer explained how the company works with the sports car maker McLaren to model airflow and improve vehicle design.
This is actually an AI model. So this is an AI model trained on simulation data. And then once it's trained, it actually gives you the answer in real time.
One of the biggest headlines here involves NVIDIA's business in China, where U.S. export restrictions have limited its ability to sell its most advanced chips. Now, the company's CEO says it will restart production of versions designed to comply with U.S. rules.
We've been licensed for many customers in China for H200. We have received purchase orders from many customers, and we're in the process of restarting our manufacturing. And so that's new news for all of you, and it's different than it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, but that's our condition today.
Huang continued that he believed, well, the U.S. president would like the country to have first access to NVIDIA's best models. He also would like the company to be able to compete worldwide.
Wang also expressed excitement about the surge in popularity of the open source agent platform OpenClaw, which has rapidly gained traction among developers.
When you take a step back and think about the impact that it's had to become the most popular open project in history in just a few weeks, I mean, it took 30 years for Linux. And so this is quite an extraordinary feat. It tells you something about the interest that the world has and really the latent need, the pent-up demand for a very well-engineered open platform for agentic systems.
At GTC, NVIDIA announced NemoClaw, an open source stack designed to add a security layer on top of OpenClaw. As the AI race accelerates, NVIDIA wants to make sure it continues to be seen as not just a chip maker, but as the central player in the future of AI. For CNA, I'm Ira Spitzer in San Jose, California.
Japan recorded a 6.4% year-on-year rise in inbound tourism last month, setting a new monthly record. According to government data released today, the country welcomed nearly 3.5 million visitors in February, despite a sharp decline in arrivals from China, which fell 45% amid ongoing diplomatic tensions. The overall increase was partly attributed to the timing of the Lunar New Year holiday, boosting travel demand. One tourism director said that while the decline in Chinese tourism was notable, the increased inflow of Taiwanese and local tourists helped to draw record crowds. South Korea remained Japan's largest source of visitors, with arrivals rising 28% to 1.08 million. Taiwan was the second largest market, with visitor numbers climbing 37% to nearly 694,000. Well, North Korea's Spring National Sports Festival is underway in Pyongyang. The festival, which opened yesterday, will see professional and amateur participants compete in up to 540 games across 30 categories. And these include football, basketball, volleyball, weightlifting, gymnastics, and taekwondo. The event is a major one designed to showcase sports development and promote physical culture. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has placed an emphasis on sports in his plans to improve living standards. Reports say that sports make up a growing proportion of the country's annual budget, rising faster than other sectors since Mr. Kim assumed power in 2021. It looks like Chinese fast fashion is growing in popularity, impacting textile markets globally, including one of Latin America's most influential fashion spots, Argentina. Local brands and designers say they are bearing the brunt of the cheaper Chinese imports.
As bridal gown designer Valentina Schuschner puts the finishing touches on her wedding dress collection for Buenos Aires Fashion Week, she says the mood is not celebratory.
Creo que está un poco raro el entorno, anímicamente hasta digo, como están todos un poco más tristes, más estresados. No sé si como que se escucha, yo obviamente estoy generalizando, pero se escucha que es más difícil llegar a fin de mes, muchas marcas cerrando.
Argentina's textile and apparel sector is facing one of its worst downturns in decades, as ultra-cheap imports, many from Chinese fast fashion platforms, flood the market. President Javier Milei has made opening the market one of his goals, aimed at deregulating trade, driving competition, and lowering prices. Last year, his government cut clothing and footwear tariffs from 35% to 20%. Rules on cross-border e-commerce orders have also been relaxed, raising the duty-free threshold for courier shipments in 2024 to $400. Milei's policies have helped rein in inflation, stabilize prices, and boost economic activity for some industries like agriculture. But when combined with cheaper imports, domestic industries like textiles are feeling the crunch. At the family-run Amasud textile plant just outside Buenos Aires, Chief Executive David Kim said the factory's running at just 30% capacity.
El gobierno quiere que nosotros compitamos. Nosotros no tenemos problemas en competir, pero necesitamos que no nos pisen con impuestos y con cargas laborales y con cargas sindicales que en otros países no existen.
A spokesperson for Milei's trade ministry declined to comment. Argentina's main clothing industry trade group said door-to-door imports shipped directly from other countries to consumers' homes almost quadrupled last year. China has been a particular beneficiary. Industry group Fondation Protéger said China's share of textile and clothing imports surged roughly 55% in 2022 to 70% in 2025, driven heavily by Shein and Temu. Meanwhile, Argentina's textile sector has cut 16% of its workforce since 2023, shrinking from about 121,000 employees to 102,000 by the end of last year, according to industry data published in February. Kim said his company invested $10 million in imported machinery over the past decade to meet the demand of clients including Nike, Puma, and local kids clothing brand Mimo & Co. But now, much of the equipment is sitting idle.
Vivimos muchas crisis en este país, pero esta es la crisis la peor de nuestra historia. No solamente la peor en dinero que perdimos, sino la más larga en tiempo y la que más en la que más gente tuvimos que desvincular.
And I hope you've enjoyed East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you look us up on all our socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.